I have 20 husbands in the village. How could this happen? That question sounds at once shocking and alluring, and it is precisely around it that our attention is focused. Today, we will go deep into Tibetan reality, where ancient rites and religious canons have shaped a distinctive way of life. Behind the outward beauty of snow-capped peaks, monastery walls, and flickering lamps lies a far more complex and contradictory world. At first glance, this place is a center of spirituality and a pursuit of enlightenment. But on closer inspection, it becomes clear that family practices are also firmly alive here. Practices that go beyond the usual notions of marriage and relationships between men and women. This is a phenomenon that in some communities is widespread and acceptable to part of the population. According to local data, the share of such families can reach up to 90% in certain villages. Such figures call many stereotypes into question and force us to seek explanations for how traditions of this intensity coexist with the religious strictness of monastic institutions. Hidden traditions lie at the heart of this phenomenon. Special family rituals, symbols, and gestures that establish rules governing life and death and shape the system of relationships within the community. These verbal and bodily signs convey values and boundaries understood by all participants in daily life. Today, these subtle mechanisms are under pressure from change, and therefore it is important to understand why the practice persists and what lessons it may offer modern society. In this study, we will consistently confront contradictions, assemble different elements of the picture, and attempt to show what lies behind the facade of familiar ideas about Tibet. Prepare to look beyond cultural signboards and see what usually remains hidden. Until recently, Tibet was most often imagined as a place of impeccable, monotonous conservative orthodoxy, where monasteries and palaces seem carved from stone and preserve centuries-old strict rules, and religion serves as the sole source of moral norms. That picture was formed from images of monks at altars, pilgrims walking dusty paths, and a clearly built hierarchy of spiritual mentors rooted in long traditions. However, in most cases, reality turns out to be more complex and multifaceted than stereotypical representations. There are facts that demand close attention and call into question simplified notions of life in this region. One such fact is the unusually wide spread of polyandry, a practice that directly contradicts familiar Western models of family life, and, at first glance, seems to challenge the basic spiritual norm of chastity. Within Tibetan traditions, polyandry is well known and largely accepted by society. The scale of this phenomenon is impressive. In some areas, the proportion of women in polyandrous families reaches almost 90%. This is not an invention or a single local custom, but a systemic part of everyday life, embedded in particular cultural codes, and in most cases reflected in social and family structures. Why did polyandry become so widespread specifically in Tibet? Why do families that typically face harsh climatic conditions, hard physical labor, and a constant shortage of resources choose this form of marital ties, alien to many other cultures? What seemingly illogical traditional grounds allow these customs to persist and develop despite possible social and legal contradictions? The answers to these questions cannot be reduced to a single simple cause. Many explanations are linked to features of an agrarian way of life, historical conditions, and social mechanisms that developed in the remote areas of Tibetan territory. In mountain settlements where the soil is strewn with stones and seasonal work often serves as the only source of livelihood, family arrangements that increase the efficiency of using limited resources took particular forms. It is these adaptive life practices that best help explain why polyandry proved viable and sustainable under these conditions. In circumstances where the birth and upbringing of children are seen primarily as personal responsibilities and help with heavy agricultural labor is vital, other practices gradually formed that differed from familiar Western models. Ways of preserving kinship and organizing collective labor emerged that allowed families to solve everyday tasks together and maintain the resilience of communities. As a result, a particular family configuration became widespread. Husbands were essentially brothers of the same lineage, and one wife served as the link between them. This form of household arrangement not only served the continuation of the line, but also simplified the management of the household, the sensible use of land, and even the exchange of information within neighborhood groups. Yet what is striking is not only the very breadth of polyandry's occurrence in the region, but also that it found recognition and reflection in religious and cultural traditions. Despite categorical rejection of such marital forms by many Western moral standards, polyandry among Tibetan peoples occupies a noticeable place in texts, rituals, and oral transmission. The system was also endowed with its own ritual symbolism. Wives sometimes decorated their headdresses with distinctive horns, indicating the number of husbands and serving as a sign of luck and well-being, as well as a symbolic connection with nature and spirits. In certain areas, entire cultic rites were performed to unite several brothers with one woman into a single family. The discovery and interpretation of these practices force a reassessment of established ideas about three fundamental cultural values: monogamy, chastity, and the one-to-one family model. Why, contrary to canonical religious norms, did these forms of marriage spread and at times receive sanction in certain parts of Tibet? What exactly are the social, economic, and spiritual mechanisms that initiate and sustain such family arrangements? And finally, what role do religion, customs, and practical survival considerations play? Can one claim that they determine the preservation of this way of life? In studying these phenomena, researchers invariably encounter an unspoken truth hidden in networks of kinship and ritual ties. Polyandry appears threatening. At 637, it is emphasized. This is why it is so important to understand the motives, prescriptions, and operating principles of these family unions. Behind them lie not merely fragments of custom, but whole answers to the most important questions concerning the formation of the Tibetan world, its traditional economy, and even the spiritual experience of people for whom these forms of life are part of everyday. They provide stability in periods of scarcity, serve as a repository and channel for transmitting knowledge, values, and practical skills, and strengthen collective survival mechanisms. Understanding these functions allows one not only to peek under another culture's roof, but also to grasp the logic of how traditions, religious beliefs, and the harsh environment shape the way of life of a people who. At 736, an important question is posed. Is it correct to regard such practices as a relic of the past or as belonging only to isolated communities? Current evidence indicates that such institutions persist, yet simultaneously undergo changes under the influence of political shifts, the development of tourism, and attempts by official bodies to regulate deviations from tradition. At 759, it is noted that the very idea of a family system based on polyandry existing in the heart of Tibet breaks stereotypes and calls into question our notions of morality and human nature. We see not only ancient customs, but also a vivid example of how people adapt flexibly and creatively to the reality around them. At 823, a remarkable observation is made. These communities manage to preserve their identity while simultaneously breaking familiar patterns and demonstrating a living capacity for renewal. The history of Tibet is far broader than a collection of images of high ridges and silent monasteries. It is a complex weave of contrast. Behind every window opening, behind every family story, and every ritual, lie answers to questions one should perhaps ask oneself. 9 minutes, 8 seconds. Beneath the visible tradition, under the layer of age-old customs, lie the fates of people, their daily struggle for a piece of land and a place in the sun. It is a search for balance between the spiritual and the earthly, between accepted norms and the natural needs of a person. The choices made in this region concern not only the organization of the family or local culture, they often mean the difference between life and death. 9 minutes, 43 seconds. Decisions here require strength and wisdom, capable of ensuring survival in a world full of internal contradictions. 10 minutes, 18 seconds. In the silence of the Tibetan mountains, where airs were shrouded in ancient mysteries and customs honed over centuries, an astonishing system of family relations took shape. It developed under the pressure of harsh nature and particular social realities that forced communities to seek unconventional ways to preserve lineage and property. In those villages where every scrap of land had inestimable value, the integrity of ancestral holdings was a matter of survival, and polyandry, a unique system of marital and kinship ties that today raises many questions among Western scholars, came into being. What prompted these small communities to abandon the familiar monogamy entrenched in most cultures? What internal mechanisms allow them to maintain such an atypical order? And why did the protection of natural resources and the preservation of the lineage outweigh personal feelings and commonly accepted moral norms? The answer, essentially, lies in the very fabric of the Tibetan world, in its social structure, in the internal. This is not simply about territory for housing, but about its acute scarcity and the impossibility of admitting new participants, young families, into already established property. In times when land was truly scarce, and each plot could serve as almost the sole source of sustenance, dividing an inheritance among numerous sons became a practically impossible task. Imagine one plot, one household, and several brothers, each of whom is fundamentally dependent on that land for his own existence and for maintaining the family's well-being. In such conditions, the disintegration of kin ties could be met not by severing connections, but by seeking compromises that would strengthen them. The compromise did not consist of abandoning children, but of adopting a new, unusual form of family and marital relations, complex in both structure and meaning. In villages where life revolves around a large extended family, the eldest brother becomes a key figure. He serves as a central pillar of social order. He not only holds the title of family head, but also performs concrete functions. He manages the household, assumes responsibility, and controls privileges, making decisions that other family members accept as binding. His voice in the household often carries the force of law, and everyday scenes confirm this. They are not merely blood relatives, but active participants in a complex play of roles on which the clan's future depends. Their rights and duties are interrelated and interdependent. If the head of the family dies, or for some reason is unable to perform his functions, the right to inheritance and the care of the widow pass to the brothers or other senior relatives. The woman, they take on household duties, running the home, raising and looking after the children, providing food, selecting clothing, and arranging medical care for the woman. At the 1307 mark, this is emphasized as a constant, systemic form of care. Even after the husband's death, the woman continues to be looked after. Her well-being is regarded as part of the clan's interests and an obligation to future generations. This is far from a simple act of kindness. It is a social contract derived from long-standing customs and entrenched notions of duty and responsibility. At the 1331 mark, it is noted that such relationships are not accidental and do not depend on personal sympathies or emotional attachments. They arise from the need to preserve common resources and pass the heritage on to succeeding generations. In the inner life of such families, the same fundamental aim is constantly evident: to survive and protect key values, land and kinship ties. At the 1356 mark, it is said that the deep causes of the complex family organization lie in the socio-economic conditions in which these communities existed. In periods when natural conditions worsened and political stability was fragile, agriculture became a relentless struggle. Against that background, competition for fertile plots often escalated into a real fight for scarce resources. At the 1425 mark, it is emphasized that under these conditions, intrafamily and interfamily conflicts could tear apart the social fabric and undermine traditions, even leading to their disappearance. To prevent such an outcome, communities developed mechanisms to preserve the unity of the clan and the land. One such solution was multiple husbands, polyandry, which allowed resources not to be scattered but to be concentrated, strengthening communal ties and uniting different branches of the clan into a single organism, where each person was a part and served the interests of the common whole. At the 14-minute and 49-second mark, it is also noted that family structures went beyond just intra-family bonds. The internal hierarchy allowed and even encouraged extramarital relationships, which at first glance seems paradoxical, since in most societies such relations are usually condemned. In Tibetan villages, where the family is defined above all by the land and the continuation of kinship ties, such relations are not merely tolerated, they are consciously supported and cultivated. This is especially evident when such ties help strengthen relations between different communities and bring tangible social or material benefits. Contacts with outsiders, foreigners, or newcomers play a special role here. They act as donors, suppliers of rare goods, and as symbols of wealth and power. Their gifts, necklaces, coins, large sums of money, cease to be mere objects of exchange. They become symbols that legitimize and reinforce extramarital. Such gifts expand social boundaries. They create new branches of kinship, open access to others' resources, and help preserve or increase family wealth. Taken together, this forms a distinctive internal structure whose logic proves deep and multi-layered. External contacts, intra-family kinship. That is why, despite strict family rules and rituals, a father-in-law may retain the right to intimate relations with his daughter-in-law, and even with other women within the family. This possibility is not accidental. It reflects the logic of preserving the lineage, where each participant seeks to hold on to the chief values, the land, the clan, and the continuity of the hierarchy. As a result, a complex, multi-layered picture emerges before us, in which tradition and pragmatism are woven together so inseparably that severing one thread means undermining the entire system. For people living in harsh mountain conditions, it is precisely such an order that serves as the guarantee of their survival. This determines their time and space, shaping a particular social order that developed over millions of years and continues to live on, despite the attempts of outside observers to understand it, explain it, or at least assess it. This internal logic is not an abstract theory detached from everyday life. It manifests in the streets and homes, in conversations at the family table, and in the customs that guide everyday actions. This is about forgotten villages. In such places, the value of land often outweighs personal feelings and ambitions, and family represents not only a bloodline, but a complex web of duties and relationships that ensure the preservation and development of the kin. This is how the mechanisms of ancient orders work. To an outside observer, it may seem strange or even this multi-layered world, sheltered behind monasteries and mountain peaks, long ago became the subject of intellectual interest and a challenge for Western scholars trying to unravel its structure. Its true essence is revealed through an internal logic deeply rooted in culture and practical necessity, and in an absolute respect for the land, where the boundaries between relatives and strangers are blurred, and the concept of family extends beyond familiar limits. A particular system has developed that cannot be understood without context, without imagination, and without respectful attention to the informational ties that make such a way of life possible. After all, it comes down to one thing. At the heart of Tibetan polyandry lies not only the desire to survive and keep the land, it is also a belief in the power of kinship to overcome hardships, to unite people in the most unusual and complex ways, and to support them on the path of repeatedly reinterpreted continuation of life. In the depths of the Tibetan mountains, in remote settlements, customs and rituals are preserved that sometimes astonish even the most knowledgeable researchers. Here, among green oases and winding trails, fine threads of social life intertwine, rooting themselves in a centuries-old cultural heritage. At the center of this world are human relationships that may sound whimsical to people from Western cultures, yet are natural and sometimes even encouraged by the locals. Particularly indicative are extramarital relationships, which in these communities are often perceived not merely as permissible, but as a factor contributing to social mobility and strengthening one's position in society. For those raised within the norms and customs of urban life, such an attitude seems unusual, yet it is precisely under these conditions that people's daily lives unfold, and a system of rules understandable to village neighbors is formed. Beneath the guise of ethical norms, there sometimes hides a complex network of relations in which gifts, signs, and personal ties decide very much. Imagine a narrow lane in the center of one of these settlements, where every movement and every gesture carries meaning. Along it walks a young woman in brightly colored cloth, She's wearing numerous necklaces and bracelets made from metal coins. These ornaments are by no means mere decoration. They serve as visible proof of her romantic ties, an indicator of social status, and often foreshadow her future within the community. Each coin, each ornament functions as a kind of social passport. They tell others who she is, how many admirers she has, and with whom she might form more serious relationships. The more ornaments she has, the higher her reputation in the eyes of neighbors. The number of items acts as a scale of public respect, while their value serves as an indicator of her attractiveness and her ability to maintain connections. The richer and more expensive the adornment, the more attention is shown by representatives of higher social ranks, and the greater her chances of finding a suitable husband. Wearing numerous coin necklaces and bracelets is not just a cultural detail, it's a visible code by which people read a woman's standing and prospects in the community. It's part of intra-family competition, an element that determines not only the individual's personal dignity, but also the status of her entire family and society. In villages where outward appearance serves as a marker of wealth and social rank, prolonged rivalries for attention and respect are carried out in stages and follow established rules. The girl's parents, seeking to secure a better future for their daughter, begin bringing symbolic and material gifts, thereby investing their hopes in her fate. In such a value system, beauty itself is far from always decisive. No less important are the quantity, quality, and assessed value of the items presented, especially necklaces. These pieces cease to be mere accessories and become status symbols, a kind of currency that can open access to more advantageous marriage proposals. When it comes to responsibility and consequences, one of the most curious features of the local culture comes to the fore: the view of society and of the participants themselves toward extramarital relations. In such communities, relationships outside official marriage are, in many cases, regarded as common practice. If a couple has a child, sometimes out of wedlock, the father is expected to demonstrate his responsibility. In Tibetan villages, a tradition has become established, rooted in custom and common practice. The father is required to stay for 2 weeks in the mother's household to thereby confirm his obligations. This essentially simple ritual has its roots in culture rather than law, and serves as an informal proof of responsibility passed down through generations. It strengthens family bonds and demonstrates that even outside of official marriage, responsibility for children is regarded as a norm that does not require legal formalization. In a system where formal laws often give way to established customs, paternal responsibility is perceived as a social duty, as a sign of courage and personal maturity. These traditions are still alive today, though often concealed from outsiders. In remote settlements where urban jurisprudence accordingly, the seal on official papers matters less than a person's standing in everyday life. When monogamy remains largely nominal and wealth and social ties become the main markers of status, a distinct, unique social mix emerges. Under these conditions, familiar notions of family and marriage are transformed. They reflect everyday practices established in community life and show how closely traditions, culture, and economic realities are intertwined. The variety of such relationships produces a specific dynamic. Women who arrived at gatherings laden with gifts and adorned with jewelry became not only bearers of material status symbols, but objects of they could attract several suitors at once, take part in actual competition for the attention of those assembled, and thereby raise their value in the eyes of others. Some of them, thanks to a combination of wealth and skill in building relationships, managed to attain a kind of super status. Such women were seen not only as attractive, this formed an important part of their social role. Here, the pinnacle of social standing is achieved not only by traditional means, but also by mastery of social interaction. This raises the question of the place of sincere feelings in such relationships. It seems that love itself is not the primary virtue. What matters more is the ability to demonstrate one's attractiveness, emotions, and significance. Within the culture where they arose, however, they acquire a coherent and intelligible meaning, an expression of respect for ancestors, an attempt to preserve social order, and a sense of personal responsibility. Traditions here are not empty formalities. They serve as convincing evidence of the sincerity of people's beliefs, and it is woven into everyday life, forms an essential part of people's world, explains their place in society, and provides a basis for decision-making. Such phenomena are important for a holistic understanding of the cultural mosaic. A pattern that at first glance seems complex and strange becomes fully meaningful precisely at the intersection of tradition and modern reality. Customs shape not only the outward appearance of social space, but also the inner understanding of what it means to belong to this culture, which values are held above others, and how the community preserves its uniqueness amid global change. Evidence and testimony indicate that in these worlds, seemingly far removed from the noise of civilization, customs and principles still operate. These principles, though outwardly alien to a European perception, serve as the foundation of a distinctive heritage. Within them lie not only ancient rituals, but whole systems of meaning which, despite their complexity and internal contradictions, construct a singular way of life. This way of life is worthy of close and serious analysis. Beyond the mountain peaks and within the secluded monastery courtyards of Tibet lies an entire era filled with mysteries and mystical practices that still elicit wonder and awe from researchers. These lands, steeped in ancient wisdom and sacred rites, preserve unique rituals related to male health and longevity, most of which are little known even outside. Among such practices, a special place is occupied by the retention of seminal energy, not merely a technical skill, but an entire philosophy closely intertwined with the local religion and way of life. This complex of ideas and practices is woven into the fabric of daily life and religious thought, and is perceived as this practical form of intimate life, rich in symbolism and deep meaning, serves not only for pleasure or procreation, but is also regarded as a powerful means of strengthening health, conserving vital force, and maintaining men's inner spiritual balance. Shouts of approval and sincere praise directed at those who have mastered this technique express not just admiration for physical prowess, but respect for longevity. In the mountain valleys, a man's significance is measured not only by his muscular strength, but by his ability to manage internal flows of energy, to rein in surges of passion, and to retain semen for many hours. It is no coincidence that local legends and traditions hold that the one who can prolong intimate closeness for long hours possesses truly valued. What lies behind the veil of this secret ritual? What psychological and spiritual horizons open to those who have mastered these techniques? These questions, posed for centuries in prayers and practices, remain relevant today. Against the backdrop of the region's political, economic, and cultural isolation, its own norms and values have evolved behind the walls of Tibetan temples over centuries. These practices cease to be merely techniques of personal improvement or methods of preserving health and become something more: sacred rules that tie a person to his land, spiritual life, and family bonds. In the harsh conditions of the mountains, the meaning of life and concern for health are tightly intertwined with traditions passed down from generation to generation for many centuries. It is important to emphasize, these practices are by no means accidental or superficial. They express a deep reverence for the body, for energy, for time, and for all living things. Self-care in this tradition is manifested through the practice of retention, the conscious management of a person's inner resources. It is believed that by this means, a person can preserve health and vital energy for many years to come. At the 3119 mark, what worldview towards sex is hidden here? Why is the practice of retaining seminal fluid perceived not only as a bodily exercise, but also as a method of spiritual purification and accumulation of life force? The answer lies in the subtle connection between body and soul, and in the role of the mentor, who in these rites appears not merely as a man, but as a guardian of tradition, something like a priestly figure. At the 3140 mark, from this perspective, sexual acts cease to be merely sources of fleeting pleasure and become a technique for conserving inner energy, aimed at strengthening inner harmony and health. Moreover, such a choice is viewed not only as an individual decision, but also as an element of a social agreement, reinforced by trust and adherence to widespread rituals enshrined in the community's norms. At the 3208 mark, it is no coincidence that communities strictly observe family and marriage customs. Endogamous marriages are rare, but they are recognized as a form of monogamous union in which young men and women sometimes find partners among blood relatives or fellow villagers. In conditions of male shortage, polygynous marital unions often arose, becoming the only way to preserve land and inheritance. When one man at the 32-minute and 38-second mark, such alliances carried not only a practical, but also a spiritual function, uniting kin groups and ensuring the continuity of family ties and holdings. At the 32-minute and 59-second mark, internal relationships were regulated especially strictly. Every decision, every role and duty was subject to established rules and customs that were approved by the community and upheld by spiritual authorities. What role does abstaining from ejaculation play in local marital practices? The answer lies in a value system where the preservation of life energy is considered a cornerstone of male health. In conditions of harsh isolation and severe natural realities, where medical care is limited and long life is a rare gift, this approach becomes not just a philosophy, but a practical solution for the survival and resilience of the lineage. The method of abstention is seen not only as a way to strengthen the body, but also as a path to accumulating inner strength, increasing resistance to illness, and preserving male potency and vital energy for many years. Inner balance is not achieved instantly. It is preceded by the development of certain tactics, practical skills, and deep inner discipline that help a man control impulses and conserve his life energy. The connection of these practices with culture and spirituality is especially evident in the understanding of health as something greater than merely a physiological state. It encompasses a whole spectrum of spiritual and mental components. It is no coincidence that in the local worldview, sexuality, longevity, care for the family, and social order are closely intertwined. This is the result of centuries-old wisdom in which physical energy serves as an instrument for inner, spiritual growth, and for a long time remained hidden from outside view. Such practices form a unique value system in which family bonds are joined with a sacred understanding of life, energy, and the path to inner youth and longevity. Only through these rites and through the union of body, spirit, and land, according to belief, does the Tibetan man attain a harmony capable of prolonging not only his years, but his inner light. Deep in inaccessible mountain valleys and secluded villages lies a secret, a key to the body, the mind, and traditions that allows people not merely to exist, but to preserve their life force for centuries. The ritual of abstention here resembles ancient ceremonies full of symbols and signs. Grains of knowledge, all this vividly demonstrates the close interconnection between health, spirituality, and social order. They are not disparate, but directed toward one goal: the preservation and multiplication of life force, the creation of a special energy that resides not only within an individual, but permeates an entire culture. No, at the 35-minute, 47-second mark. In this capricious world, where the accustomed boundaries of time and space are blurred, practices for managing inner energy become for individuals and for the nation as a whole symbols of eternity and stability. They serve as a key to longevity, to a source of inner strength and spiritual awakening. Now at the 36-minute, 22-second mark. In the depths of these mountains, in the heart of the high Himalayas, hidden are not only the age-old knowledge of Buddhist monasteries and the majestic landscapes filled with a spirit of seclusion and contemplation. Beyond the at the 36-minute, 45-second mark, Tibet is not only sacred texts and historical monuments that inspire awe in tourists from around the world. It is also a living socio-cultural layer where family ties are arranged according to ancient, at times astonishing and morally contradictory rules. Customs passed down from generation to generation cement in the community a unique memory embodied in rituals and traditions that often do not take modern ethical standards into account. At the 37-minute, 16-second mark, If one attempts to look beyond the well-known monastery walls and see the less public, sometimes hidden aspects of life, all these phenomena form a distinct system of kinship and intimate relations closely woven into everyday rituals and customs. It is accompanied by a particular attitude toward widows and family obligations, which are often not expressed through formal marital institutions, but manifest in more complex, in remote villages where nothing impedes the preservation of ancient customs. Such relationships are perceived by the local population as a natural and indisputable part of their worldview. Here, kinship ties have not only legal and ritual significance, but also a sense of sacredness given meaning by generations of tradition. In the impoverished and isolated regions of Nepal and Tibet, a striking pattern is observed. Most families organize their lives according to principles that, in the West, seem unconventional or even strange. These principles permit, for example, women having multiple husbands, women having extramarital relationships, and polygamous ties among men. Why does this happen? At the core lies a deep social structure designed to prevent disruption of the balance of power and to ensure the community's stability. Such a system relies on its own traditions, rituals, and symbols, as well as on a distinctive notion of honor and love that sharply differs from familiar Western concepts. This whole complex formed over a long historical process as a result of acts of resistance and adaptive strategies embedded in the cultural code of the people and reinforced by ritual. Despite the influence of modernity, external pressures, and globalization, traditional practices persist. Sometimes they withstand outside pressure. Sometimes they openly challenge it. But in most cases, these traditions are not merely prescriptions of everyday order or a set of rituals. They serve as the framework for self-understanding and communal identity. That is why, to this day, one can hear in the accounts of men and women a quiet pride and confidence. Kinship ties for them are not an abstract norm, but part of their spiritual and social world. Will international organizations, relying on contemporary human rights norms, be able to persuade these peoples to reconsider their established patterns of relationship? Or will the unique cultural distinctiveness, including practices that may seem shocking from a Western point of view, retain its force and become ever more deeply rooted in history? This issue cannot be easily resolved. It concerns not only social rules and customs, but also deep questions about the nature of morality, respect for tradition, and what it means to preserve national identity. These identities were formed over centuries, followed their own course, and rested on internal values unlike outsiders' ideas of what is right. This is not a mere ethnographic curiosity, it is a living, pressing question of our time. The future will show in which direction this part of our cultural heritage will change, whether it will transform under the pressure of global change or stand fast, thanks to the resilience of cultural foundations. Both overall progress and the desire to preserve the stability of the cultural landscape play a role. It is important not only to preserve traditions, but also to recognize them as part of a rich, multi-layered, and diverse world in which each culture seeks. In doing so, we help preserve their unique beauty and deep meaning for those who believe and continue to follow the ancient paths.